at the end of the day, instead of being like, man, I didn't do it all, I just think like, oh, I got some stuff done. I'm moving forward. No matter how slow, no matter how incrementally, like there is forward movement. And I
Yeah.
just focus on that instead of the perfection piece now. And it has helped me so much. Hello, hello, beautiful people on the other side of this podcast. We love you so much. Thank you for being here. You are listening to High Vibin' It with your girl, Kelsey Aida, best-selling author and transformation facilitator, and also my best friend, Lindsay Robinson, who is a hypnotherapist extraordinaire. And I'll let her explain in her own words how she helps
Are you
people.
sure about that?
Yes.
First of all, thank you so much for being here, guys. We're always happy to see you every week. I'm hypnotherapist, intuitive coach. I help you rewire your mind for success and achieve your deepest desires. When everything else fails, your mind will not. That's the best I got
Don't sound
today.
too excited now.
No, listen, my throat and my voice, in case anyone can't tell, like it is actually painful to get to this volume. So I'm gonna be a little bit. It's probably a relief to our listeners, but I'll probably be a little bit more mellow today. Maybe not. We'll see. Once I get warmed up, it might not hurt so much.
I don't think it's a relief. I feel like you're the more mellow of the two because I have like a lot of inflection and like
You kidding
enthusiasm in
me?
my voice.
I
And
think
then
we need
your
a
voice is
poll.
like the calm hypnotherapy voice.
Yeah, when it's appropriate. But I get really I would say I'm the one that's the most flamboyant of the two.
Really? Wow. We
Yeah.
need to have people vote on this on the Patreon. So if you're on our
Who's
Patreon,
crazier?
you need to vote in the comments on this episode, like who is louder
No, I'm just
and
gonna put a
crazier.
poll in there right now so
Oh,
people will
Lindsay's
see it.
putting a poll live on air. If you're
Yeah.
not on our Patreon is basically where super fans of the show go to support the show for a couple bucks a month and they get extended bonus episodes, well, bonus content on each episode and guided
Did you
meditations
say
here and there,
extended
little
episodes?
gifts. Yeah, extended
Okay.
episodes. You can watch the videos there. If you're
Mhm.
watching the video, you'll see that my naked face goes perfectly with the theme of today's episode, which I'm going to tell the story of how the theme came to be because I think
Yeah,
it's
tell
fun.
the story while I post this poll.
Yeah, so I was in the sauna having my sacred sauna time, as I like to do at least multiple times a week. And I was like, damn, Lindsay and I are recording a solo today, and I have like no idea what we're going to talk about. Like, what are we going to talk about? So I'm in the sauna, I'm listening to my like yoga, Sanskrit, chanting music. I've got my little like wisdom mudra going, and I'm in there by myself, which is like the best. And I was like, podcast gods, send me the topic. Like, please send me the topic for the day. And the first like little download that blipped into my mind was just the word love. And I was like, love, this is the most broad topic of all time. Like, can you specify? And then it was like love for self. And I was like, oh, we always talk about this. Like, I don't want to talk about that today. Like, we've done a billion episodes on it already. So I was like, scratch that, something new, something new. So a couple more deep breaths later, and the words that came to me were the illusion of perfection. And I was like, ooh, this we can work with. This is juicy. Knowing that, well, you guys should know that I'm a recovering perfectionist. I think it's safe and fair to say Lindsay's also a recovering perfectionist.
Indeed, yes.
And we're not here to villainize any perfectionist. You know, if you're a perfectionist, that just means that you care. And it could mean that you tie your value to certain things that might not be beneficial for you, which is where it can become a detrimental way of being and habit. So we're not saying there's anything wrong with being a perfectionist. It can be a beautiful thing to take pride in your work and do your best job always in life. But at the same time, if you feel that your perfectionism is hurting you, this is probably the episode for you.
Yes, I'm excited for this one. And I like to say perfection enthusiast, but we'll get into why that's the idea of perfection anyway is kind of silly, which is the point of this episode. Yay.
Yeah, because I feel like, especially in this day and age with social media, it's
Yeah.
easy to think that other people's lives are more perfect than yours, or other people are more perfect than you, or doing better work than you, or in a more perfect relationship than you. And we're here to just call BS on that because, as we've talked about before on the show, it's come up briefly in a couple different episodes. Like, people are just posting the highlight reel of their life. They're not going to post about when they're crying from heartbreak, probably. They're not going to post about like the fights that they're having with their partner. They're not going to post about how shitty they're feeling about their body today. I mean,
Mhm.
some like authentic influencers will do that, and I think it's great. But for the most part, everyone's showing you what they want you to see and how they
Yeah.
want you to perceive themselves in their life. So, one reason not to compare yourself, especially on social media. But perfection in general, like, I don't know. Let's talk about our relationship with it. Like, what's yours like, Linz? How has it evolved? Let's go there
And now are we talking my relationship with perfection or with social media
with
comparisons?
perfection.
Okay. My relationship with perfection has I would love to say that, it's a thing of the past. I would love to be like, no, I don't struggle at all ever anymore with perfection. Because if I'm being completely honest, the struggle with making something as perfect as it can be is the biggest challenge in my life. It's the thing that takes the most time from me, the most energy, the most effort. Um, yeah, I would say it definitely doesn't happen as often. I will say that. I can give myself props for that. It doesn't happen as often, and when it does come up, I do recognize it. I've gotten pretty good at recognizing it. However, I don't necessarily always stop myself. Do you know what I mean? I'll notice it's happening and then I'll be like, "Yeah, but I just gotta finish this one. Yeah, but
Yeah.
I just gotta do this one
The
more time. Yeah, yeah,
compulsion
yeah."
is strong.
The compulsion, yeah. And so, of course, inevitably at the end of this struggle, you know, forced myself away from whatever project I'm working on and I just feel awful. And I think the thing that I want or the thing that I want to express in this moment about that is there's no amount of time or effort or energy that I could possibly put into something in order to be satisfied with it. And I think that's the thing that
Right.
we chase as perfectionists is that, well, if I can do this, then it'll be fine. If I can do this, then it'll be fine. But there's really no end. There's no end to that. It's the compulsion, I think, that is the driving force. And that's not going to go away unless you actively just stop. Stop it.
Yeah. Do you feel like in your perfectionism habits or like tendencies that it has anything to do with like proving yourself to yourself? Because I feel like that's like a big theme for me personally.
Yeah, I do. I think my everyone's biggest critic is themselves. And I was just having a conversation with my husband last night about I didn't even think I was, being any type of way, but Kelsey knows and because it just happened yesterday, but you guys will know when the episode airs that my sons, both of them have been sick last week and this week. And so and my husband is doing a television show. So he's gone for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. So there's not much time for me to really get work done unless I schedule around the times my youngest is in pre-K. Them being homesick doesn't allow me to do really anything. So at the end of the day yesterday, I was like, knowing that I had been fully nursing my son and making sure he was fine, doing a freaking podcast while he's asleep on the couch, even. And then I'm looking at the dishes and I'm like, I didn't do the dishes today. Ugh. And I got that feeling of like, dang it, Lindsay, you know better than that. You can do this. And it's usually that. It's like, come on, Lindsay, you could have done so. But then I had to actively remind myself, no, no, there was not there was not a moment I could have squeezed in to do anything other than make sure my son was okay and work when I could. And then, so I was talking about that with my husband and I was just telling him kind of like, yeah, I didn't really have time to do, anything and he goes, "Yeah, stop putting so much pressure on yourself." And in that moment, I had no idea that I was doing that, but I was like, "Oh my gosh, you're right. I am. I am, and you can tell." So yeah, it's really just about that competition with myself that I know I can you hear that? He's screaming for me. Um, Said son is calling me. So
Hold that thought.
To finish the thought was just, yeah, it is basically a competition with myself, and making sure that I'm doing everything that I can do. I'm gonna go check on him. Kels, you tell
Yeah,
them what you think.
no worries. Yeah, I feel like for me, I don't know if it's like the chicken or the egg, right? Like, was I born a perfectionist or did I grow into a perfectionist from training as a young ballerina, like the majority of my adolescent life? I'm not really sure. I think it's a combination of both. I think it is my personality to want to be the best and strive to get to the top, which is probably why I gravitated towards such an intense art form. But at the same time, it's like you become groomed into perfect, right? If anyone's ever taken a ballet class, they understand that like you'll never be good enough. Your feet are never turned out enough. Your butt is never squeezed enough. Your rib cage is never tight enough. Your shoulders are never down enough. You never make it look easy enough. You're not jumping high enough. You're not doing enough turns. Like it's never enough. So it's hard to say if I was always just naturally a perfectionist or if I became more of a perfectionist because of all those years of such rigorous training and criticizing yourself in the mirror and trying to be the best and competing with yourself and everyone else around you and everyone else who's ever done the activity that you're doing that's not even maybe doing it anymore. But I think for me, it's been something I've always struggled with. And these days, like, what has helped me more is to just have the awareness that, like, first of all, what even is perfection, right? Like, what is it? Does it actually exist? Is it a thing? Can it be attained? Probably no. So that gives me some relief. And then also, my new motto is done is better than perfect. So, for example, like if I'm working on a manuscript for a book, or if I'm creating a course, or if I'm like making an Instagram post or whatever it is, to remind myself before I get so obsessive or when I notice I'm getting obsessive, like, Kelsey, putting it out there is better than never putting it out there because you need it to be a certain perfect way that literally probably nobody else cares about. So are you gonna like get in your own way and stop yourself from spreading the medicine because you don't feel that it's perfect?
Mhm.
Or are you gonna be in your purpose work, allow it to be the best that it can be, and have that be enough? And not make it mean anything bad about yourself when you feel like it's not quote unquote perfect, whatever that even is.
Yeah, and you mentioned dancing. I know that, well, you're the only dancer I know, but I know from movies, right, that, people are constantly in competition with each other because especially as ballerinas, like, there's always a star of the show, right? There's usually, like, the
The
ballerina.
prima. Yep.
There you go, thank you, the prima ballerina, and so you're always kind of wanting to be better and better and better and, reach that. So I would imagine that that definitely is a huge theme in those circles of perfection and trying to do the best that you can do whilst also being the best in the room. It's
Yeah.
a big thing.
Well, and I think it's like, where is the line, right, between like being competitive and being a perfectionist? Because I think there's some
Yeah.
overlap and crossover, and I don't think there's anything wrong with a little healthy competition. I'm a super competitive person, and I think
Mhm.
it helps me. And like my fiance is super competitive, like obviously. Um, and I think it can be a great thing in certain contexts when used like to your benefit and not to
Yeah.
your detriment. But it's interesting to reflect on like perfectionism versus the word that I was just saying that left my brain. Competitiveness.
Competition,
Yeah.
competitiveness. Yeah. I mean, there
Competitiveness.
definitely is a difference. If you look at a perfectionist, the perfectionist never really, it's not a quality, right? It's kind of like it's a tether holding you where you are because there's no end to the struggle, and it just hurts. My battle with perfectionism has hurt, physically, because I'll feel the stress in my shoulders. It hurts emotionally because I know it's never going to look how it looks in my brain, and that drives me crazy. um it just hurts, and I think healthy competition can only make you better. So if at any point it hurts, maybe that's it.
Well,
Maybe.
and I think one of the big differences is like when you're a competitive person, you enjoy competing. You're
Yes.
enjoying the process of competing. You're enjoying the journey of creation, right? It's
Yeah.
very different than like when you're a perfectionist, you're always going towards the end goal that's never good enough. So you're always setting yourself up for failure with yourself,
Yeah. Yeah,
which is
exactly, and it's
exhausting and like no way to live. And I have great compassion for everyone out there listening that's just like us and understands
it is
that
very,
it
very
can
exhausting.
be a painful, exhausting, long, drawn out process. But here we are. We're all healing from perfection together so that we can have a healthy relationship to the idea of doing our best and not beat ourselves up unnecessarily. And it's interesting because when I was having my Asana download moment, I was compelled to like look up the definition of perfection in the dictionary to see like have we strayed from the word? What is the word
Mhm.
actually supposed to mean? And I found some interesting things. So in one of the definitions, part of the definition was as good as is as good as is it possible to be? Wait, I think I
As
wrote that
good
wrong.
as it is possible to be.
Yeah, 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 as good as it is possible to be. Okay. So to me, that's not what I would think of when I think of perfection. Like that's more of like as good as it can be, which implies like it's good enough. Like this is as good as it can be. It's almost like it can't be perfect, right? If you think of
Yeah.
perfection in the sense of how we've been using it. And then another definition that stood out to me was to make something completely free of faults or as close as possible to such a condition, implying that something can still be perfect even if it's not completely free of faults.
Yeah.
And also, that begs the question like, who's to say what the faults are and if there are any? Because that's really like in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
So I thought it was
Yeah.
very interesting that even in the word perfection, it doesn't really
They
imply perfection.
they can't really commit to saying, well, what would you how would you define it then? Without saying, well, perfect is perfect. Like, how would you define what
Well,
would
I
the
just think there
definition
is no
be?
such thing.
Well, of
So
course
even
there
the
isn't.
word
No.
perfection is like confused about what it is.
It is interesting though, because even if the definition of perfection said literally perfect, we know as humans that it really doesn't exist, at least on this planet, right? It just doesn't exist. There are perfect moments, I believe, that there are moments you can be in that are just
Yeah,
they
I would
could
say
not
like
be
it
better.
doesn't and it does, but it just
It doesn't
depends
and
like
it
how you're
does.
looking at things.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've definitely don't want to I would rather believe that it doesn't exist. I would rather believe because of my obsession with, my struggle with it. I would rather believe that it doesn't exist, but there are moments that feel perfect. And in my house, we don't say practice makes perfect. We say because God, how toxic is that by the way? We didn't talk about that. But we say practice makes better. And even if I slip up and say practice makes perfect. My 6-year-old will be like, "No, perfect doesn't exist, mom. It's practice makes better." I'm like, "Oh yeah, thanks, buddy." So
Mhm.
I'm really glad that I mean, I say this a lot, but our kids these days, like this generation has so many resources that we did not have. Kelsey, I know you and I are, maybe different generations, but you and I both did not have what my kids have. Like even at school, they're doing breath work. That's incredible. They have, you know, the growth mindset practices. They do yoga on Fridays. This is absolutely amazing. And with that comes this idea of the illusion of perfection. And it's not just my teachings, which I do in the house, but they're actually learning this outside of the class, outside of my house too. So it's very nice to know that they're not being held to the same claustrophobic and debilitating standards by society, perhaps that we were.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you use that phrase because the practice makes perfect is something that came up a lot when I was training as a ballerina and as a
Hmm.
dancer in general, because it was like, don't practice it wrong. Otherwise, you're going to solidify into your body like how to do it wrong. Like practice it perfect so you can stay and
Uh-huh.
be and get more perfect at it. But then when I was in beauty school, after high school, when I went to beauty school, I heard for the first time practice makes better because like
Mhm.
hair cutting is hard when you first learn it and like hair color is like a crazy science too when you first learn it. So you
Yeah.
can really fuck some hair up. You can really do some damage to people. And it was the
Yeah.
first time I'd ever heard like that by practicing something you can aim for just better and
Yeah.
improvement. And like my mind was blown. I was like, I don't have to do it perfect every time.
As good as
Dang.
it can possibly be.
That's my
Yeah.
mind-blowing sound.
Pew, pew,
Which
pew.
brings me to another Asana download that has to do with this topic, which was some things we can aim for instead of perfection. So, if perfection isn't really a thing, even if it is a thing in moments, it's really just based on your perspective. Like I can say, "Oh, this moment is perfect. I think it's perfect that your son came in and interrupted the podcast. I think it's perfect that everyone's sick and they're going to get better. I think it's perfect that I'm going through a challenging time in my relationship, or I think it's perfect that the weather sucks." Like you can make anything perfect in your mind if you want to see it like that, right? But on the flip side, if perfection isn't a thing and we can't attain it and it's not even possible, and even the dictionary is confused as to like, is perfection a thing? Then some things we can aim for instead are peace, harmony, growth or improvement, which brings us back to the, practice makes better. And I added from my own like personal mind, this was not part of the download, finishing. Instead of aiming for perfect, just aim to finish it, whatever it is, if you're like obsessed with
Yeah.
project
Because
based perfection.
because based on my experience too, I can obsess and obsess and obsess and get the colors. Basically my biggest perfectionist struggle is with like launches, website design, things that I'm creating. Me and Canva, basically. My relationship to Canva is a perfectionist relationship. But when I actually finish or when I say I'm okay, I'm done, fine, just submit it. Rarely am I satisfied completely. However, I don't think about it for 5 seconds afterwards. And I never remember that part. I always remember like how much I want it to be what I'm seeing in my head. But at the end of the day, the second I close my computer and leave my office, I'm not thinking about it. And so if I could just, we collectively as perfectionists, if we could just get to remember that part, like, don't worry, you're not going to worry about this in 5 minutes. So why are you worrying about this so much now? I think it would make it a lot easier to just finish, just be done.
Yeah. And this topic of conversation, I don't think you were there, but remember when we recorded with Andrea Donnelly, aka the Sea Witch on
Oh
Instagram? Is that
yes.
what
Yeah,
she
I
is?
had to leave early.
Yeah, you had to leave early, and then afterwards, I don't know if you watched, the recording or not, but I was like, "Oh, like, if you have any like, if you're picking up any vibes from my spirit team, like, let me know," basically, and she was like, "Well, are you a perfectionist?" And I was like, "Yes," and she was like, "Well, basically, they
Knock
want
that shit
you
off.
slash, like, you need to learn how to make it okay to just make progress."
Yeah.
Which really hit me hard. I was like, "Whoa, whoa,
Mhm.
whoa." Because in my life, like, doing so many different things, especially as a manifesting generator, being a hairstylist, being a transformation facilitator, hosting retreats, writing books, having coaching clients, doing the podcast, like, it's so many things, and I'm also getting married at the same time, and there's so much going on, and it's, like, so easy for me to get overwhelmed and feel like I have to do everything, and I have to do it all now, and I have to do it all perfect, and I have to
Yeah.
get it all done,
Same.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
So
It has to
now
be all done now, and you have to finish it now. You can't just make progress like that.
right.
Yeah,
Ever since she said that to me, at the end of the day, which I always run out of time to finish everything I'm trying to
totally.
finish, and then the to-do list for tomorrow gets longer, right? But
Yeah,
at the end of the day, instead of being like, "Man, I didn't do it all," I just think like, "Oh, I got some stuff done. I'm moving forward." No matter how slow, no matter how incrementally, like there is forward movement. And I
yeah.
just focus on that instead of the perfection piece now. And it has helped me so much, like so
I think
much.
that is very important, and anytime I hear reframes or get reminded of the reframe of, like, just move the needle forward, whatever's gonna push the needle forward, whatever's gonna get you one step closer, be okay with that. That really same as you, it really helps me, to be okay with just making progress. I think you and I, we preach this a lot on the podcast, but we really need to give ourselves more grace. And I am getting better at it, especially in the winter months. I find that it's a lot easier for me to do that because my body just wants to hibernate anyway. Like I just want to slow down. And so it's easy to do something when you want to do it. But when it's hard and you still can do it, I think that's the biggest win.
Hey there. We hope you're enjoying this episode so far, but if you want to listen to the whole thing, we're going to invite you over to our podcast. Either search for High Vibing It on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you guys listen to podcasts, or even better, if you want to watch the extended video version of this episode that's even longer than the actual podcast itself, head over to our Patreon at patreon.com/highvibe. Lindsay, tell them what's awesome about the Patreon.
Patreon is where we have all of our extended episodes. As Kelsey said, we have it on video so you can actually see the things that we're talking about. Sometimes we have visual visual aids and it's nice to know what we're talking about. We also have hangouts that we do sometimes that are exclusive to Patreon people. And you can get started with all of this and bonus content and everything that we have only for the Patreon people for as little as $3. I think it's $3.33 a month, and that's it. And you guys can get all the benefits and all access to everything that we put in there. Really
Yeah,
cool.
it's really cool, really fun, super easy to join. And you guys don't even have to do that to finish this episode. If you're like, screw it, I don't want to pay any money, I just want to hear the rest of this episode, go to our podcast, High Vibe in It, search for it wherever you listen. It's totally free. Either way, enjoy the rest of the show wherever you choose to enjoy it. And we will see you guys next week because we do a new one every week. Adios.
Bye.